taking the time to come out and hear Katie talk today. If you are a first-time visitor to our Library and Education Center, just a little bit of background for you. We opened our doors in December of 2022, and we are proud to house over 5,000 volumes of books dedicated to horses and equestrian pursuits. We host a number of educational lectures, author talks, and documentaries. If you haven't signed up for our mailing list, please do so because we send out emails about upcoming events. So now, without further ado, I would like to first thank Claire Hoffman for introducing us to the organization, and thank you to volunteer Ted from the SPCA, who set up the wonderful display that you see in this room today. For the guest of honor, Katie Flory has worked for the Maryland SPCA for 19 years, training thousands of volunteers and members of the community in animal-related topics. In her current role as the Community Care and Advocacy Director, she is responsible for humane education, analysis, and advocacy of legislation affecting animal welfare. She provides educational presentations to local schools, universities, and community groups on animal safety and welfare. She is also the chair of the Baltimore City Mayor's Anti-Animal Abuse Commission and is on the Dangerous Dog Hearing Board for Baltimore City. This is my favorite part. She lives with her 3 dogs, Rue, Governor Tugboat Tank Speedman, and Dewey. So I think there is a nautical theme there. But Katie will confirm that. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce you to Katie Flory.
Yes, right off the bat I will say I absolutely have a nautical theme with all of my animals' names. It's fun. I really, first of all, want to thank, can you guys hear me without a microphone? Yeah. I'm pretty loud. Yeah. The first thing I want to say before we even get started is to thank the Horse House and Jeannie and Cricket, the executive director, for inviting us to do this talk. I also have to thank Claire Hoffman, one of our extremely dedicated Maryland SPCA volunteers, and Ted for helping me put this together. This was one of the most interesting topics that I have ever had the privilege of researching. There's a couple of things before I even get started that I want to mention because I found a lot of interesting information. But 2 specific things I want you guys to be aware of before I even get started. First of all, some of the language that I was seeing throughout, especially the late 1800s and 1900s, to me is very offensive today. For example, using the term dumb animals. I found that throughout history and through our books, and I'm like, animals are not dumb, they're the best things ever. What are we talking about here? So when I looked into that, I realized the true definition of those words were any animal without language was considered to be a dumb animal. To me, they're smart, but that's okay. So as I go through some of what we're talking about today, I want to preface it that it's not my language, that it may be the language of that era, which was very, very different than our language today. The other very interesting piece of information, and I think as a woman, I did know this, but it was reinforced for me over and over again. Researching women's history is not easy. Every woman that I came across was labeled by her husband's name. So it would have been, Mr. or Mrs. Rob Flory instead of my actual name, and then having to then figure out that actual woman's name was very, very hard. So I'm proud to say we've come a long way where we actually do have our own names and we can be who we were. But looking through that history, it was quite challenging to see that, and I think we're in a much better place than maybe we were. But today I'm going to talk to you about some of the pioneering women within the Maryland SPCA. I could literally talk to you guys about this for about 4 hours, and we don't have that time. So what I did do was I looked through our history and researched all of the amazing women that have been a part of this organization over the last 155 years. I narrowed it down to 4 that I really wanted to focus on. But I can't even focus on these women until we talk about, all right, well, the one thing is this may not be working.
It's not gonna work.
All right, hold on. I was on a roll. All right,
That's technology.
okay. Technology, not my forte. That works, perfect. So we need to talk about the beginning before we can even get to the amazing women that I want to talk about today. Some of you may or may not know how the animal welfare movement even began. And that was in 1866 by a man named Henry Bergh. He was actually the ambassador to Russia. And while he was there, he saw a lot of mistreatment of the workhorses, and it really, really bothered him. When he came back home to Baltimore, he continued to see that trend, or I'm sorry, to New York. He continued to see that trend and said, I can't do this anymore, I have to do something about it. He left the embassy, and he is accredited with forming what we know today to be the ASPCA. The ASPCA is an organization in New York City, still going strong today. They are more of a national organization, but the other important thing to know is they are not the corporate office up on the hill. Once Henry started this, yes, it absolutely bloomed throughout the country, but each organization has its own policies, own procedures, and ways of doing things. So we are not connected officially, even though Henry Bergh definitely gets the credit for starting the animal welfare movement in general. In 1869, a man named William Woodward became the first Maryland SPCA president. He again saw the plight of the workhorse in Baltimore City and said, this is enough. So he brought together a group of well-known men within the Baltimore community to develop the first Maryland SPCA. This is a list from October of 1869 of the founding members. A couple of names that stuck out to me as I was looking at this is Enoch Pratt, the last name Janney, and there's a lot of other street names throughout Baltimore that I have seen with several of these names. It's very cool to see so many old Baltimore names involved with this organization, even 155 years ago. So extremely cool to see this. What did we do when we first started? We had agents that patrolled the streets to ensure that we were preventing beatings from pain, from poorly fitted harnesses, from lack of food and water, and overloaded wagons. That was a huge problem for the workhorses in the Baltimore community. Their owners were loading them with too much. They didn't have proper fitting equipment. They didn't have enough food and water. Also, many times when horses would fall or a wagon would break down, it was the horse that received the brunt of the punishment from that owner. We did not want to see that. We needed to stop that, but we needed to have officers patrolling to be able to do that. What's also very cool is you can see the picture of the fountain and the list of fountains. One of our supporters purchased that fountain, and it is still on Calvin Street today. You can still see it. It was created to give water's fresh horse. Okay, that's what we know. We got it. You know what I'm saying? Fresh water to the horses in the Baltimore streets to make sure that they weren't getting over dehydrated, that they had access to that. And this is a list of where all of the different fountains were, and then the one that we know still exists today. There was also an operation put into effect with horse-driven ambulances that would go around, and if a horse was hurt, they had an ambulance to actually pick that horse up to take it back to the stable or to our offices where we could then treat it and help it with any way that it may be needed. We also had water wagons on top of the fountains that would drive around and provide water to the horses as they were working and moving their way with the goods and so forth along the streets. I think that's pretty cool. I would have liked to be a water girl, driving around making sure all the horses had what they needed. Butler Scherer. Yeah. Amazing woman. She was born in 1866. She was born to Dr. and Mrs. Thomas Scherer. And Mary's background was full of privilege. She studied in Milan, in Paris, all around the world in music and in vocal. She was a wonderful singer, and the stories that I read were a lot about her and her social engagements that she would sing quite a bit along with her brother. She was devoted to two things in her entire life. The first one being her brother, who she was a companion with and lived with for their entire lives. Her other pursuit was cruelty to animals, ensuring that that did not happen. She joked with many of her friends that she received her first marriage proposal at 16 and her last at 60. And she never chose to marry any of them because she felt that her pursuits were more important than becoming a wife. It was also quite known that Mary could not cook, did not want to cook. I know how she feels. And she commented that, I believe, during one of the wars, that she wasn't sure how her brother and her were going to survive because it was not going to be by her cooking. She got involved with the Maryland SPCA in 1897 as part of our membership. And way back then, anyone could be a member for 5 cents as a donation. So she started her activity there and then slowly became more and more involved. One of the interesting roles that she played was she was the chair of the animal shelter at Covington and Lexington Street.
Yeah.
We did have several offices kind of around the city, and she was in charge of one of those, ensuring that when the animals came in, that they were being cared for, also that people were being investigated for any animal abuse charges or different things like that. Yeah, she's an interesting looking lady, is she not? I'm in a lot of meetings with her photo, and she's always sort of looking at me, and I'm like, all right, Mary, it's okay. It's all going to be okay. She was known to berate a bad owner. And I quote bad owner because, again, that's another piece of language that I don't always love. I think that is a little bit subjective. But in Mary's case, I think she knew what she was talking about. It is a great story that is told about her that she was walking down one of the icy streets in Baltimore on a cold January day when she witnessed a horse slip with its wagon. And she witnessed the owner going over to beat the horse. She ran over, she grabbed the whip right out of his hand and continued to berate him, maybe whip him as well, until he was able to get the horse upright and was treating it appropriately. It was also said that if there were not police in the streets, she would literally walk that person who was committing that crime right to the police station and make them turn themselves in. And they all did it. She was quite a force to be reckoned with. And when she continued her involvement in the Maryland SPCA, she also spent time out of the state in Philadelphia and all around, as I told you before, with her education. She met a wonderful woman named Caroline White from Philadelphia. Philadelphia already had an SPCA, but they also had a women's auxiliary SPCA, and Caroline encouraged Mary to get involved more with the SPCA, to have an auxiliary women's committee that would really be supporting the animals in our city. So Mary did that. She went to the president at that time in 1900, and she started the Women's Auxiliary, and the first group of women that were inducted into that are the list of these women's names. You may notice that you see the last name of Linthicum, again, a very old Baltimore, Maryland name. Mrs. Jessie Tyson is a very interesting name to me. Jessie Tyson, is actually the gentleman that built Silbert. So if you've ever been to Silbert Arboretum, he was the owner of that home, which is, again, a home you can tour through and look through. So again, a number of names. Redwood, I know there's streets named after that name. So a lot of very prominent women within the Baltimore community at that time coming together to be part of the Maryland SPCA. And again, do things that they could to ensure that workhorses in our community were being treated with love, kindness, and compassion. Mary in action. So she became the 8th Maryland SPCA president, but the first woman president in 1907, we're going to say. And I say we're going to say this because when she made her passion known to become the president, it wasn't as easy as her just being voted into office. In fact, it became the Battle of the Ballots. The Battle of the Ballots was between her and Captain Whiteford. He was the president. He wanted to continue to be the president. Mary wanted to be the president too. Hence the Battle of the Ballot. They made it all the way to the Court of Appeals in Maryland. over 3 different courts said that Mr. Whiteford won, and Mary did not. Mary did not let that go and continued to take it further and further in the court system until the Court of Appeals came back and said, President Scherer, it is you. You are president. And Mary became president in 1907. I looked through why this was such a contentious type of ballot. Like, I've been with the organization for 19 years. I've seen many board presidents come through my organization. Nobody argues over who is going to be president. So it was confusing to me. And I can't find anything concrete that tells me why. So I'm going to tell you why I think. Mary was a woman.
Right.
There had never been a woman. And I think at that time, a lot of men in that community did not want to see a woman become president of anything. Mary fought back, and she was right, and she became the president of the Maryland SPCA, which, again, I'm extremely proud of. When she became president, she had 3 main goals. The first one was to endeavor to teach the ignorant. Another one of those words I was mentioning before that I don't love. That was her quote, not mine. Also, she wanted to punish the depraved and malicious offender. And she wanted to advise and correct, because I can't say that word, the careless and indifferent. When I look at those 3 things and I think about what today's Maryland SPCA looks like, we may be using different words, but we're doing the same thing. We are ensuring that animals are cared for. We are providing information to people to help them know the right way to go, the right thing to do or not to do. And then also advising and telling people, hey, this is the right thing to do through legislation, through being here today and talking about the organization. So I'm very proud that today we are still following the legacy that Mary set and where she thought our organization should really go. In the 1950s, we came upon another turmoiling time, I guess, within our history. We received a letter under Mary that was basically saying from 7 different medical research facilities, you must give us all of your stray dogs. And at that point in time, we were actually not bringing in cats at all. This was just dogs. They said, you have to give us your stray dogs, and we are going to do research on them. One of our founding policies was we would never use an animal for research, or vivisection, if you are familiar with that term. And that's also doing research on live animals. So it may also be doing a surgery on an animal that is alive and not under anesthesia. We are not okay with that. We never have been. We never will be. So when this letter was sent, we, under President Scherer's guidance, sent a letter back saying, no, we are not going to do this. And then became the battle, where these 7 universities and medical facilities then decided to go the legislative route and basically made an ordinance through the city, because we had the city contract, that we had to give these animals up. Again, we said no. And so we cut off our contract with the city. To this day, we do not have the city contract, not because of anything that's going on today. It's just the history of what we decided. We would not go against the foundation of the organization and put animals in a position where they could be hurt by any means. I think during that time it was an incredibly difficult decision to basically have to fight the city, and hospitals like Johns Hopkins, they were one of the organizations that sent that letter. So no, we were not going to do that. We cut off our contract with the city and moved forward from there. So then we move into another woman who stole my heart, I have to say. Her name was Celeste Winans Hutton. She was born in 1923. Her education is very interesting. She actually, before I even talk about her history, the SPCA ran in her blood. Her grandfather was our 5th president, Guam Hutton. He's kind of, I guess, started the precedent and raised all of his family to love animals as well. With her post-education, her doctorate, she was actually doing things with animal husbandry. She was the chair of the pony committee, and also did pony shows with the Maryland Fairgrounds. She became a member of the SPCA in 1945, on the board in 1946, and was also the secretary of the board in 1946. On top of her pursuits with breeding animals as well as horses and ponies, she also became the chair of several committees and organizations. One of the other very cool things about her is she was the first president that really looked at the media and how they could help what was going on in our community. So she was very active in the newspaper, in the Baltimore Sun, and the different newspaper outlets that were out at that time. And as I was looking through history, I found article after article about her and the different things that they were going through at that time. On the left at the bottom is a picture of Celeste as she was older. She really did some very cool things while she was at the SPCA. First of all, she instituted our humane education program. And this goes back to Mary's comment about making sure that we're educating the ignorant. She looked at it a little differently. She wanted to ensure that people were able to interact with animals, to learn about them, to have their hands on them, to learn about that compassion. So you can see that we still had horses at the SPCA in the 50s. We had our own farm area where young people could come in and meet the animals. We had animals named Popcorn, and I believe Comfy and Cozy were two other ones. And still to this day, people that grew up in Hampton, especially 70s, early 80s, 90s, talk about the petting zoo, talk about going to see those animals and being able to interact with them and learn about that kindness to animals and how they could participate in that. She also was responsible for getting the Maryland SPCA's property, known as the Evergreen on the Falls, on the historical registry. A very quick history on our property. It was built in the late 1800s by Henry Snyder of the Snyder family. Unfortunately, he died about 3 years after completing the home of smallpox. His wife was not able to maintain the property on her own, so she ended up selling it to the Carroll mining family, and they put their son in there for quite a while until we bought it in 1926, I believe, for about $14,000. Very, very cool. This is a picture of the house. It is still standing today. It is actually our administrative offices. It houses our executive director, my department, our communications department, finance department, and a lot of other things. In our main conference room, you can still see the original fireplaces and marble, got my words today, marble mantles. It's a really, really cool house to be able to work in, but to see what Celeste did as far as going back and saying this is an old history, we need to keep this and we need to get it on the registry. There's also a pump house on our property that was the pump house for the Hamden Reservoir before they filled in the reservoir to create Route 83. We've all been on 83 at one point in time. So they used all the dirt to fill in that. Today's pump house is actually used as our spay and neuter facility. Every animal that comes into our facility gets spayed and neutered, and we have redone the pump house on the inside, but the outside it still says pump house and the different things that it was used for way back when. So she, again, got that on the registry, again, was prominent in the media, and then she was responsible for the fundraising and implementation of new and updated kennels. And what I will say, if you look at this picture, I was really looking at it compared to now, things are a lot different now. We've done a couple of other additions, but the footprint is still the same. Still have that garage, which we use on a frequent basis. This building actually right here is referred to the bungalow on our property, and it now is offices. It used to be an actual house for the caretaker of the animals on the property. So a lot of it is still there, and we're still using it, which is very cool. But Celeste felt it was very important that we have the most up-to-date kennels for the animals that come in to ensure that they were receiving the proper care and compassion that they needed. And we really looked at the 5 freedoms when we were doing that, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Now I'm going to go into Debbie Thomas. So Debbie was back in the 90s, and as I was doing this, I thought, well, guys, you know, we were really interested in the early 1900s and the 1800s. And then I realized the 90s was 30 years ago. So it is definitely still an important part of our history. And Debbie Thomas started as the executive director in 1991. She was with us until 1997. She is actually, I will point her out, right here in this picture. And I put this picture up specifically because Debbie was instrumental in us putting in policies that created fundraising for that organization. I mentioned earlier to you that anyone could donate 5 cents and be part of our membership. 5 cents isn't going to be enough to help the animals that we had coming in at that time. So Debbie found ways to institute fundraising. Santa Claus is one of them. We still do this today, Photos with Santa, where we invite animals and people to come in. We maybe charge $5, $20, whatever it would be, and the person would get their photo taken with Santa. I have several of my own over the years. It's a really great place, and this picture is actually in the headquarters house, or what we call the mansion, so you can see the original mantle behind it. Debbie also was instrumental in starting marketing for the organization. Still today, we use the phrase, feel the warmth of a cold nose. I've never heard a better marketing phrase than that phrase. You just think about it, whether it's a cat or a dog or a bunny or a horse, feeling that warmth of a cold nose, pretty good day for everybody. So she created that for us. She also started different brochures. I do love this one. It may be hard to see, but it's, the big lettering says, there's someone we'd like you to meet. But above it, it says, like your chest, not bothered by dog breath. Don't mind someone drinking from the toilet. There's someone we'd like you to meet. So again, that marketing and that being innovative with the new things that were coming about in that time frame were really, really important to setting foundations for this organization. She also was the first one to come up with the March for the Animals. As I know it, it is the festival for the animals. We have done this event over 20 years now. It had become our biggest fundraiser, raising over $300,000 one year. This was an event to bring people together for the love of animals. Whether it was a horse, a cat, a dog, a snake, a fish, does not matter. That's why we called it specifically the March for the Animals, not the March for Cats and Dogs. It was the March for the Animals because all animals are important. We did realize over time that when it came to what we were the experts in, unfortunately it is not horses. It is cats and dogs. If somebody brought a horse in, we would help them find the appropriate experts to take that animal to. We have received goats and chipmunks, fish, rats, you name it. We will always help that person, whoever's bringing that animal in, find that expert, but we know what we're the experts in and who else can help us. But because of that, we set that foundation for fundraising, which has allowed us today, we have a budget of over $7 million. And we have an amazing development department that has carried on what Debbie put in place to continue to fundraise and to help more and more animals every single year. Then we get to Aileen Gady. She started as executive director in 1997. She is also the woman that hired me. Good or bad decision on her part. But I will say that Aileen is one of my mentors. When I started with her in 2005, I sat down with her. She had a little something she called a chance to chat with Aileen. And I sat down with her and I said, all right, Aileen, how'd you get to where you are? I need to know this so that I can get to where you are years down the road. And she told me what her thoughts were. But even more so than that, she took me under her wing. She knew what I was interested in doing, and she helped me explore the different avenues of animal welfare and how I could get more involved. And I watched her. And I will tell you guys, she was a tough lady, but in all the best ways. She was responsible for our newest building. You can sort of see the adoptions entrance behind you. She was responsible for fundraising for that, for putting it together. She moved us from an open admission shelter to an appointment-based shelter. And the difference between the two, if you are in an open admission shelter, you have to, by law, take every single animal in, even if you don't have space for that animal. If you are an appointment-based shelter, which we are, we try to schedule animals to come in based on the space that we know that we have. It gives us the opportunity to talk to owners to find out what's really going on with the animal, to ensure that we are going to be the best place. And if, maybe somebody's scheduling an appointment to surrender their animal, and we find out that the reason they're surrendering is because they just can't afford to feed the animal, if I can give you food, are you able to keep the animal? So we really try to counsel and work with people to figure out the best place for that animal. Our organization, along with the Baltimore County Humane Society, are both appointment-based shelters. Baltimore County Animal Services and BARCS are both open admission shelters. So again, they have to take in every animal. And this will be my plug for things. When I see on social media and every place else, people talking about don't take your animal to a shelter, they're going to euthanize it. They don't understand what's going on right now. And what's really going on is those shelters, and I'm making the numbers up, but it's the reality that's true. Maybe they each have 100 cages in their shelter, and they get in 105 dogs in one day. What do they do with the 5 dogs that they don't have a cage for? Some of you might be thinking, just put it in a cage with another dog. We can't do that. First of all, we could have a capacity of care issue, or by law, we can only have a certain number of animals, because we also have what we call capacity of care of number of staff versus animals and how many we can take care of. There's also always a concern of disease outbreak, and there's a concern of behavior of dogs and cats or whoever not liking each other. So when they don't have space for those animals, that could potentially mean that those animals have to be euthanized. It is not about being open admission or non-open admission. It is about space and doing the right thing for the animals that we have coming into our facilities, including horses. She also developed the organization called BAWA. That stands for the Baltimore Animal Welfare Alliance. That includes Baltimore City Animal Control, BARCS, the Maryland SPCA, Baltimore County Animal Services, and the Baltimore Humane Society. We meet on a bi-monthly, quarterly basis, depending on how crazy we all are, which has been crazy lately. And we talk about trends in our city. We talk about what's going on in each one of our shelters, where we're having struggles, how we can help and support each other to make change throughout our city. One of the things that every single one of these women taught us, or at least me as I was looking through all this, none of us can do this on our own, whether it is horses, whether it is cats, whether it is guinea pigs. It really does take the village to stop the abuse that we're seeing. We have to work together to save these animals, and it is absolutely the same in our horse community. We all know each other. We're all in it together to make sure that the horses are being taken care of, that they have, again, clean drinking water, safe places to go, and the medical care that they need. When I was speaking to Amy about this, and I asked her, because I asked every still living executive director, the 3 things that they were most proud of. And one of the things that I would say all 3 that I spoke to said, but I included on Aileen's, was a strong leadership team and hiring the right people to maybe supplement what they felt their weaknesses were, or making sure they had the right people in place to fulfill the mission and the vision of the organization. Then we get to today's leadership. So I am really excited to tell you guys that both of these amazing women are my boss. And I know you're like, wait a minute, you have one boss, you can't have 2. I actually do have 2 bosses. So Jessica Lancelotti is our executive director now. She has been in the position since July of 2023, but she has been with the organization for a little bit over 5 years. She actually started as a volunteer when I was the volunteer manager. She then was our finance director. On top of that, she became our deputy executive director, and she's now our executive director. And then we also have Sharon Colburn, who is the director of animal control in Baltimore City. She started in January of 2013. When you heard Jeannie talk about my bio a little bit, she said that I was on the Dangerous Dog Hearing Board in Baltimore City. Sharon Colburn runs that, so she is my boss for that reason. So I technically work for the Maryland SPCA as well as Baltimore City. Well, what's going on with horses now in our city? There is actually an ordinance that you cannot have a horse living in Baltimore City. And when I found that out, I said, Sharon, well, why is that? That doesn't make any sense to me. And she said, Katie, there's not enough space for a horse to be able to live comfortably and have all the resources that they really need. The only exception to that are the A-Rabber horses. By a raise of hands, is there anybody who has not heard of the A-Rabbers before? Okay, just want to know how much you want me to go into it. But I will say, we know that there is definitely a culture with the A-riders in our city. Some people feel strongly one way, some people feel strongly the other way. But they're still here. Animal control's role with horses in the city is to ensure that these horses are being cared for in the appropriate way. They go to the 2 stables that are left in Baltimore City, and they are the Fremont and the Bruce stables. They inspect the horses, they inspect the stables, they ensure that the horses' teeth are being floated, that their hooves are being taken care of, all the things that we would expect when it comes to horses. After that, though, they really don't have any interaction with horses. Out here in the lobby, I did bring a copy of today's horse regulations in Baltimore City, if anyone was interested in taking a look at what those are today. Most of the horse operations or horse regulations now fall under the Department of Agriculture. They go out and do a lot of the investigations, but again, they're not doing it alone. They do partner with the animal controls across the state, depending on where the horse investigation may be, in order to promote kindness to animals, the way that they are being treated, and so forth. What are we doing today? So, with the foundation of what Mary and Celeste, and also I can't do this talk without mentioning also Estelle and Blanche. These are 2 other presidents that did, again, really amazing things for all of our animals. They set those foundations of standard operating procedures. One of the other things that I didn't mention with Debbie, and when she was telling me the history, I gasped when I heard this. When she started in the very, very late 90s, early 80s, she found out that the animals in our kennel were not being fed on Sundays because that was the only day the staff had off. So they didn't feed them on Sundays. Inappropriate, wrong, we all know that. She fixed that very quickly. She ensured that standard operating procedures were happening so that we were caring for these animals in the way that was the best, the most forefront thinking, and that is still what our organization is doing today. Under Jess's leadership, we have been able to really start what we call our pet retention efforts. There's a misconception out there in the animal world, and again, I think it's whether a horse, a dog, a cat, we don't want your animal. I want you to keep your animal. I actually have one of the few jobs where I want to come in one day and have Jessica say to me, hey Katie, all the animals are saved, you're fired. That would be a really, really good day for me. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But if we can find ways to help people keep animals in their homes and keep them happy and safe and being cared for appropriately, that is a win. We do that through spay and neuter efforts. Yes, you will never talk to anybody more in favor of spay and neutering than me. It is truly the way I believe that you will be able to fire me one day because animals will no longer be reproducing and we won't have so many and not enough homes for them. Adoptions always will be important. There's nothing better than going to my job every day and seeing that animal go home into their new family and their little tail is wagging or that little meow going. Nothing better than that. Again, pet retention. With that, we talk to people, we counsel them. We have a pet food pantry, which last year gave out 1.2 million meals to keep animals in homes. We also do community clinics where we provide veterinary care in the under-resourced communities. We work with a number of organizations, one being Greater Good, which you may or may not have heard of. They partner with the bigger pet food companies. And how many of you in the room, by raise of hands, have ever ordered from Chewy? Love Chewy. And when you order from Chewy and you can't use whatever they sent you, or it's broken or missing whatever, they either tell you to return it or they tell you to give it to a shelter. Everything that they can't sell, they give to Greater Good. And then Greater Good says, hey, what shelter wants it? We just got our first truck out the SPCA this past Saturday. 20 pallets of supplies. It includes horse supplies. So when I go through that and I see the horse supplies and the guinea pig supplies and all the things that, for example, we may not be able to use here, I will call up Baltimore City Animal Control, which I've done in the past, and I'll say, hey, I've got a lot of horse feed, not sure what to do with this. They will come and get it, and then they will get it out to the ARABber community or to other partners that are caring for horses. So we make sure that everything we are getting, we are helping every single animal we possibly can. Yes, we're the experts with cats and dogs, but that does not mean that we are not invested in all of the animals in our community. Foster care. One of the coolest things that I don't want to say we've invented, but that we have started doing, it's the same for horses too, temporary housing, so that we don't have so many animals in our shelter that we might have to make a decision whether we had to euthanize an animal. We never want to do that. When we started our foster care program, we were able to start placing sick, abandoned, underage, not sure what's going on with animals into home environments. No matter how amazing any shelter or temporary housing is, it's not a home. So if we can get them into a home, we tend to see animals that relax, that get the care they need, that thrive, and then we're able to learn more about them, help them find homes, and save more animals. Volunteers. I think between Jeannie and myself, we thanked our volunteers about 57 times. I will thank them 100 more. Without volunteers, you don't get the work done. The volunteers are our backbone of our organizations, and we can see that also going all the way back in history, where a group of people came together to start an organization. Not one of them were getting paid. They did it specifically because they had a love for something, and now we have close to 800 volunteers, I believe, and I'm looking at our volunteer manager, who is also here, to make sure I'm right about that. And again, without them, the work doesn't get done. They help us with everything. And when I was talking about Kibble Connection before in our clinics, this today is thanks to Ted, who again, without, as a volunteer, like if we could figure out a way to phone him, none of us would have to do our jobs, I promise. And then lastly, legislation. When I got into my position in 2005, I was an adoption counselor. We weren't really doing anything with legislation. That had sort of fallen to the wayside. And Aileen started going to Annapolis during a very specific, highly charged case where a young boy was bitten by a pit bull. And unfortunately, that led to a law that basically said that all pit bulls are inherently dangerous, which I highly disagree with. I have 3 at least at home. If anything, they just lay there all day and slaughter on you. But it's okay. But what that was going to mean for our shelter environment was that animals were going to die because people would have to turn in their animals simply because of what the law said, and it was a discriminatory law. We like to look at animals as individuals. Just like way back when, again, a horse was a horse, but they did so much for us. Animals do so much for us, whether it be that bond, whether it be working for us, whether it be a service animal. And we really, really want to make sure that, that my battery's getting low, that we are able to advocate for them. We were able to change that law where pit bulls are no longer considered inherently dangerous. And I've had the privilege to work with Baltimore City and the state of Maryland to put a number of laws into effect. Some absolutely affecting horses. We were looking at temperature laws when it becoming very warm and very cold. We were able to make dogfighting implements against the law. And just quickly with that, it's very hard to find dogfighting. It tends to be a very hidden crime. So at least if we were finding utensils that we all know would be used for dogfighting, we could bring charges on those if we couldn't find the animals or the actual people. I do. It's in my purse. Now today, we do not feel like we're the expert with horses, but that's because we have a number of partners out there who are. First of all, Days and Horse Rescue. If you have not heard of them, go check them out. They are one of the coolest organizations. They're located in sort of the Mount Airy area. They are the experts when it comes to any horse maltreatment. They are the organization that has all of the horses. They take them in and they rehabilitate them. And then use them as therapy animals or a number of different things. But they really are the experts specifically when it comes to cruelty with horses, investigation, training, and education. I have had the privilege to work with Diet Hillman, I believe is her last name, a number of times. Another one of my mentors and women that I look up to say, wow, doing some amazing, amazing things in our state. There's also the Maryland Horse Council. Their core mission is to lobby state and local government for sensible and economically sound positions, really within the horse community and the horses that we all work with today. I'm also privileged to be a part of an organization called PAWS, which stands for the Professional Animal Workers Society. This is a group of executive directors and directors from around the state of Maryland that get together on a quarterly basis to say, how's it going? What's going on? What's happening in Calvert County versus Baltimore City versus Garrett County? Because Maryland is a really cool and interesting state. In 2 hours you can get to the mountains, and in 2 hours you can get to the water. We have counties that have a lot of resources, and we have counties that have very, very few resources. So it's really important that we're talking to see what those trends are. And I explained BAWA earlier. One of the big things that came out of the BAWA organization was the treatment of ringworm. If you're not familiar with ringworm, it is contagious to people. Yeah. And kind of one of the running policies that all shelters have is we can't treat things that are contagious to humans. It is too hard in our environment to be able to do that. So 10 years ago, those kittens would have been euthanized because they had ringworm. And when we were looking at our numbers around our community and saying, we are euthanizing a lot of animals simply because they have ringworm, we said, what can we do? We have a trailer in the back of the Maryland SPCA property that specifically is there to house ringworm kittens. So now, when anybody across the state has ringworm kittens and they can't treat them, they know they can call us and we will try to take them, treat them, and then adopt them out. That was how we were able to look at what's going on around the community and how can we as an organization be the leader in fixing it. Can't do it ourselves. We don't want to. We want to work together to make effective change, whether, again, it be for horses, ponies, cats, dogs, any animal that we see out there in our community. And now I get to wrap up. So I've talked a lot about the history and these women that I was able to research. You guys heard in my bio that I've been with the organization for 19 years. Part of my job is humane education. We do have a number of programs geared towards teaching the next generation compassion. We have a program called TLC, which stands for Teacher-Led Curriculum. It's an 8-lesson program to talk between kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade to teach compassion, to teach reading skills to young people, and also, again, kind of help create that next generation of animal advocates. I also am in charge of legislation, which we talked about. I'm in charge of our pet retention efforts, and I'm in charge of our volunteer program. I always like to say I'm in charge of anything else that nobody knows what to do with. A couple of you mentioned when you came into these, and you saw me on WBAL yesterday morning. What I like to say is you really didn't see me. I'm a chauffeur. You saw Charlie. It is one of my other roles that is actually one of my most favorite roles, is I do get to go to local TV stations to promote our pets, to talk about the cool things that are going on, and to show them off. There's nothing better than that. And people are like, I don't know how you can do that. It's because it's not for me. It's for them. And that I look back to, as I talked when Celeste was so active in the media, I was like, wait, I'm doing that too. And then I thought about Mary and the different things that she did. And no, I haven't whipped anybody for hoarding their animal, but time will tell. What I learned, and I was trying to figure out if this makes sense, but I want to say it. All of these women had an amazing passion for compassion. And throughout history, and even in my almost 20 years, there have definitely been days and I'm like, whew, how do we do this? This is crazy. I should just be something else. And then I researched the history of our organization and I go, wow, these women went through much bigger challenges than I ever had. They came out on top. Our organization is 155 years old because of the footprints these women left. And I do think I'm a little bit of character myself, but I definitely have large shoes to fill. I hope that I will be able to continue to fill them, but I will tell you all that under the leadership of Jessica and Sharon, I know we are headed in the right direction. These are 2 more women who are going to be trailblazers and who over the next couple of years, I hope you keep your eye out because you're going to see great things happening from our organizations. And we work together on a frequent basis if there are different things that we need to. This is my information as well in case you do have any questions that you wanted to follow up with me on. We're going to do a Q&A session, but I wanted you to have my information. Uh-oh, I didn't know I skipped that. Okay, Q&A. Does anybody have any questions that I can answer for you?
I do.
Yes.
I always have a question.
Yeah, please do.
My question is, I'm familiar with ringworms from eons ago, years ago, that people would get, but I think it's not a question, it's really a comment.
Yeah.
But I think it's amazing how, not amazing, but how animals can get the same type of illnesses that human beings get. So there has to be, scientists didn't tell me this, but my brain is telling me there have to be a transition.
There is.
Because when you're, I'm thinking when you're, like if I'm under someone that may have, no, I'm not gonna say that word, that may have something, some type of illness, and then you can catch it, so the same concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good example of that is COVID. For a long
I
time.
didn't want to say that
No,
word.
I'll say it. But and again, we're still learning about COVID. There are definitely diseases, illnesses, bacteria that can move from animals to people and vice versa. And then there is, at some point, that transition of where it jumps from the animal to the person. And I think that goes back to things that I don't necessarily know about, but germs and things being very smart and figuring out how to do that. With ringworm, what was frustrating for a lot of us is it's actually you can treat it.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit of it takes a minute. So we would have to figure out a way to house those group of animals, treat them, not pass it to any other animals, and still bring animals in. That's where it becomes very challenging, whether you're working with horses or cats or dogs. We only have limited space, and if I have to keep a litter of kittens for a month to treat them for ringworm, how many other kittens or horses or dogs could I have brought in? So this trailer allows us to focus on that one specific issue while still maintaining our daily operations with the other animals that are coming in.
And I also want to say, I thank you for being in Baltimore City and doing great things in Baltimore City, because there's one thing that behooves me about the state of Maryland is everybody picks on Baltimore City, but they never open their eyes to the crime and the things that's going on all outside of Baltimore City. Baltimore City is always a negative focus, so much so that people are afraid to go to Baltimore City. And I grew up in Baltimore City, so I don't like that.
I hear it. Well, and what I can tell you from animals and from what I've seen and know, when you look at Baltimore City Animal Control, they are the experts that other counties are looking at to say, how are you doing what you're doing? We need to model that. There is a bill I just testified for in Howard County last week, where Howard County is going to now they're trying to pass a TNR law. And if you're unfamiliar with TNR, it stands for Trap, Neuter, and Return. There are thousands and thousands of community cats out in our community. I like to call them little lions. They are undomesticated cats. A lot of people would just like us to euthanize them because that's all we can do. We cannot bring in an undomesticated cat to a shelter. It will not be happy. We will not be happy. Somebody will get hurt. But what we can do is trap, neuter them, and then return them. And when we do that, the entire colony dies out over time. We do not have to euthanize, but they are no longer reproducing. And one of the issues that came up was, well, how are you're getting them vaccinated yearly? I will tell you, community caretakers, they're some amazing men and women as well. They know every single cat in their colony, who has had medical care, when they need what. So that is not an issue either. But Howard County has not passed this. Baltimore City passed it like 10 years ago. So we are really at the forefront when it comes to animal advocates and doing the latest in standard operating procedures. And when I was talking to Sharon about what she was most proud of, that was the number one thing that she said, that when she got in, she set policy, daily operations, provided training to her animal control officers that maybe they never received before. And a lot of that training has moved us from what we're going to consider of the enforcement officer, dog catcher, to an actual animal control officer who is out there to help and support animals and people. which then goes into our mission, which is to improve the lives of pets and people in our community. One of the most important words in that mission is the word people. Without people, what happens to the animals? We need people. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've run into a lot of people that love animals and don't love people so much. That's okay. It really is. But we need people in order to continue to help the animals. And that is something else that all of these presidents knew. They brought in good people. They ensured that they had a wonderful board of directors to support them, to pass the policies, to make sure that the animals around them were getting the humane treatment that they deserved.
And one more thing, I also like the fact how that some of the cats have the tags inside of them, because we had a neighbor that left her cat on purpose, and so I'm not a big cat person, and so my neighbor was, and so we had this battle with wherever the cat go, wherever the cat stay, so I won. And so anyway,
The cat one.
yeah, I won.
And what you're referring to is a microchip.
Yeah,
So animals,
that's pretty neat.
and again, this is
I like
one thing
that.
I actually don't know about horses, so I will ask you all. Are horses microchipped as well?
can
They
be.
can be, okay.
It's
They're
not required for USDF competition.
Okay, awesome. So yes, and that is a great thing for them to be able to do. Any other questions? Yes.
No question. How many Abrahams are still in the city active?
So I can't give you the exact number of the individuals. I can tell you there's 2 active stables. There used to be 3. One was shut down due to the conditions, and they actually sold that stable. But those Arabers, or Huskers, as they were also called, were moved between the other 2 stables. Through talking to Sharon and learning more about the Arabers, Animal Control and the Arabers had a very good relationship. They support each other to ensure that, again, the horses are being cared for. And you know, I'll tell you guys, I have mixed feelings about it as well. But what I will say is I spend a lot of time in under-resourced communities. And I have yet to see a corner store that has fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
So if this is done appropriately, and these horses are being taken care of, and the culture that is behind it, I think it's important that we still provide that. Because not only are we saying that we provide care to animals, we need to also provide care to people.
Yeah.
There's a great documentary about that.
There is, yes.
Yes.
And I have not had a chance to watch it, yes, but I've definitely heard of it and want to check it out.
Yes.
There was a bill that recently came up, I don't know if it was in the city council or it may have been a statewide thing, regarding juvenile offenders. And one of the things they took out was the animal cruelty point. They didn't take it out. They were thinking
It's
of
still
it.
there.
They were thinking of it.
They were thinking of it. Okay, so I can fill you in on a little bit of that. So we all know, if we watch the news or we live in our community, that there really is some unease from our community with juvenile justice. That young people maybe aren't being held accountable for the crimes that they are committing. That does extend to animal abuse. So if I have a 12-year-old who hurts, kills an animal, there is nothing we can do. Do I personally want to put a 12-year-old in jail? No, I don't. But I do want to get that juvenile support, therapy, whatever resources we can to ensure this doesn't happen again and the child is getting the help that they need as well. With the way that this is now, nobody can really do anything. The other one that goes along with that is also still going, we're hoping that both these bills will be passed, is a stacking charge loophole. And I'm going to talk about it in terms of horses. So let's say there's a stable of 20 horses, and somebody goes to investigate and they see that all these horses are emaciated, maybe a couple are dead on the property, whatever that may be. They can only charge that owner for 1 horse. They cannot charge them for each one of the horses because we have stopped being able to stack charges. And the problem is with horses and dogs and cats, they are looked at as property. So maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal if they stole 5 motorcycles and we can only charge them for 1 motorcycle. To me, it's a very big deal when you hurt 20 horses, but you're only going to be held accountable for 1. Not appropriate in my book. So those are 2 laws that we are really trying to fix loopholes in. And we were very concerned that they were going to take the animal abuse section out of the child bill. They did not. They did put it back in. So we're hoping it passes. It hasn't completely gone through, but we're getting there.
And you can submit written testimony
Oh yes.
on the Maryland General Assembly
Yes,
site.
you can written, you can do both. I spent a lot of time in Annapolis. It's an interesting, but also it's interesting, but I highly recommend everybody do it at least once in their life because it's an interesting. I always remember in school, how a bill becomes a law, and now I'm like, oh, we're participating in it. It's kind of cool.
It's a good platform.
Yes.
Is there a mounted police in Baltimore City still?
There
There's
is.
so much
Yes,
back and
the
forth about
police
that.
do have stables. Actually, animal control doesn't have anything to do with those. I think, again, they do fall under the Department of Agriculture.
Sure who was.
Because I know when I talked, she mentioned it, but no, they are there, but animal control does not have oversight.
Where are they? Are they?
Grant Park.
Yes, yep.
They're on B&O land in
Okay.
Grant Park. A
Grant Park.
state-of-the-art stable
Mhm.
was built for them with an education center and a paddock. And then Brandon Scott came in and got rid of them. But before Jack Young left office, he transferred them from the police department to Park and Recs. So we still have the oldest continuous mounted patrol in the United States.
Cool, very good.
Look at my heritage.
I'm a Baltimore City tour guide.
Where was that located?
The B&O, you said the B&O.
It's on B&O land, but it's right next
Oh,
to
the
Grant
railroad,
Park.
museum?
The B&O Museum,
Yeah.
right, that's what I meant, right, the Railroad Museum,
Yeah.
right there on Pratt.
Aside from those two laws, anything else we worked on this session?
So there were a number of laws we worked on. What has made it
Or
through?
survived?
Those are the two big ones that have really made it through. The ones that have not, that I'm saddened about, are pet-friendly housing. In the shelter world right now, that is a huge issue for us. People have to turn in their animals because they simply can't find pet-friendly housing. We were trying to pass a bill that would have said any apartment complex that is accepting money from the state would have to get rid of some of those requirements and allow animals to be in, and that did not pass this year. The other thing that did not pass, that I'm very, very sad about, is the spay and neuter bill. So about 10 years ago, we passed a bill, we became the first state across the country to be able to do this, that how many of you have a cat or a dog at home? You all are participating. So about 3 cents from every single bag of dog or cat food that you buy went from the distributor, went to a fund. It generates about $1 million a year. And then different agencies across the state can submit grant applications to receive a portion of that money to provide low or free spay and neuter in their community. We get money every year from the Department of Agriculture to be a part of that program, but with inflation, we are seeing the number of animals we're able to help drop because of costs rising. And nothing had been done with that bill in the past 10 years. So we did go back and say, hey, couldn't we up it like $30? It's not much, help us. It also would have allowed for people to be able to donate to that fund, and it would have allowed us to request money for transportation. That's another big challenge in the community right now is when we talked about under-resourced communities and they're not finding fruits and vegetables, there's also no vets in our under-resourced communities. There's also a transportation issue. And even if you have bus service, you can't take your dog on the bus. So how are you able to get your animal anywhere? So we're trying to be able to get money for transportation so we could figure out how to be able to bring the animals that need it the most to where they needed to get. Unfortunately, that did not pass this year. As long as I've been involved in legislation, there's definitely the ups and the downs of it. But what I find encouraging is that we keep going back. And whether they're tired of us or they finally realize we're right, we're definitely getting things passed one way or the other.
When you said pet-friendly, are you talking about the fees they charge?
The fees or not letting them come at all. So my very first dog that I ever had when I was in college was a Rottweiler. And she was, again, one of those breeds. I thought they should have given me a discount versus not letting me in at all. But they, for some reason, feel like certain breeds of dogs shouldn't be allowed in the home. I will also say I don't have children. I have dogs. I think children do more damage to the home than a dog does. But that's okay. So it's definitely something we'll continue to look at, but it's the pet rent. It is the fact that places don't allow the animals at all. And people are making decisions simply because they have to go somewhere. So I have to give my animal over to you. And it's nothing that they're doing wrong. It's simply an issue in their life, and we're trying to see what we can do to help with that. Any other questions? Yes?
I don't have a question, but I have a friend in the next row from Oh, you did?
Absolutely.
So where across the pond exactly? England? Okay.
It was from, actually, it was
The RSPCA, yes.
but it was the PSA.
Oh,
That
yes.
was taking joy in
This
the
is
war.
very, very cool. And I will tell you,
Chosen rescue.
as I was researching, everyone looking around here, the RSPCA was definitely one of the organizations that I was looking at as well, to see sort of what they were doing versus what we were doing. And I would say still today, the RSPCA is a very prominent and get-it-done kind of organization across the pond. Yes.
Actually kind of leads into what I was going to ask, which in these areas where we have a veterinary desert, should we say, is there any work or focus being done on providing mobile services?
Yes, very much.
Like EDSA?
Yes, very much so. So as we go back and we were talking about the horse ambulances, we're not doing it in that way, but during COVID, we had to get inventive because nobody could see their vet. So the Maryland SPCA actually came up with our Paw Plus clinics on our parking lot, and it was a drive-up service. You would literally come up in your car, we'd take you in the lap, we'd do everything we needed to, make sure it was good, get them back in and get them on your way. Once we did that, we realized, okay, we can do that for people that have cars, but what about people that don't? So we actually went into a number of the different neighborhoods, and we have a mobile adoption unit, and we converted it into a working clinic. And we've taken that into a number of different areas, and we hope to continue to be able to do that. Also with the food and supplies that we get, we try to take that out in the community. We partner with another organization called the Esperanza Center, where we go and work with the Hispanic population to work with their cats and dogs. And what we have found is a lot of that community is very wary of coming in for medical care, first of all because of the language barrier, and also because of the trust factor. So one of our veterinarians speaks fluent Spanish, so we're able to have her really work with clientele where they feel much more comfortable, their animals are getting seen. And I will say the number one thing we do, and it is hard, it's hard, it's one of the hardest parts of my job, but it's also the most important, is losing the judgment. People will come with animals that maybe to your and I standards don't look loved. And the story I will tell you, I just had a clinic last Saturday, and I drive a certain route to work every day. I live in Anne Arundel County, I drive through the city to get to the SPCA. And there is a gentleman who is on my route that has a dog. I see him every single day. I talk to him, I talk to his dog, I ask him how he's doing, I give him food when I see him. And I asked him the other day, I was like, is your dog up to date on shots? Nope. And I was like, well, I can get them done for you. And he was very appreciative. So our volunteer manager and myself on last Saturday morning drove down. I told him where to meet me. I put him in my car along with his dog. I drove him to the SPCA, and we got his dog his shots.
Awesome.
And the number one thing that I heard from everybody else there is, wow, he really loves this dog. Like it was a surprise. And it's not. Whether you are homeless, whether you are down on your luck, that doesn't mean you feel any differently about your animal than anybody else does. So for us, it is that lack of judgment and that support, and again, that passion for compassion. Thank you guys. The last thing I will say, and there's several people in this room that know this, I was so nervous about doing this. It really was. I have not slept in like 2 weeks. And it is simply because I really wanted to do the women of this organization the justice that they deserve. And again, I will leave it with, I hope in my 50 years with the SPCA, by the time I retire, that I can be even a fourth of the women that these women were and are today. Thank you guys so much for coming.
So before I get to the raffle, I want to thank Katie and her team for this incredible talk. Another round of applause, please.
When we are finished, because I know the raffle is really, really cool, I do have 3 people I just want to point out to you. I'm here to answer questions, but we also have our executive director, Jessica Lancelotti, in the back. Next to her is Terry Jones, who is one of our board members. And behind Jess is Katie Haynes, our volunteer manager, if anybody's interested in learning more about volunteering. And then the amazing volunteers, Claire and Ted. So I just wanted to make sure to point them out, who are also in the